John Saunders. It's such an honor and a pleasure to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much for being here today.
Great to see you, Alisha. Thank you for having me.
So, you and I have been working together through New Degree Press and the Creator Institute over the last, almost a year now.
It's hard to believe.
I know. And I have been dying to have you on the podcast for a really long time. So, it is a pleasure to have you here today.
You're too kind.
So, can you tell folks a little bit about who you are in this big, beautiful world and what you do?
Thank you. Really great to have you here. And it feels like in some ways, I feel like we've known each other 10 years, even though it's only been one, right? I'm just a kid that grew up in the Midwest as a paper boy and always wanted to live in a big city and moved out to after college. My parents were always investing and sort of in and around the stock. They always had Forbes and Investors Business Daily around the house. And so and they actually bought an investment for me when I was 3, all of their children, when I was about 3, which I still own to this day, by the way. They put $1,000 in a mutual fund and I still own it literally to this day. I've never touched it. And I often joke, how do you make an investment go up like 125 times? Like buy it and sit on it for 40 something years. So after school, went to school out in Wisconsin, moved to New York City to work in asset management. I worked on Wall Street for 23 years. I just took this very, I've got so many great mentors along the way. I took this very responsibility driven approach, meaning I always tried to make things better, tried to take on more responsibility. And that, continued to help me get promotions. And fast forward 23 years, suddenly I'm the senior vice president running a team and raising $4 billion a year in assets. Led a number of initiatives for the organization, which was really fun around coaching and different asset initiatives we had going on. And then the company was sold in 2019. Had the great privilege of leaving, which was kind of nice. And it's hard to believe that was about 3 years ago, almost to the day. And, I got some great advice after I left there, Alisha. This woman, number of people, someone said, start writing, put something on LinkedIn. I said, great idea. Another woman said to me, John, if you want to figure out what to do next, she said, go immerse yourself in something and your value proposition will manifest itself. And I remember thinking, what are you, Yoda? I don't even get that. And I started to go to all these events. This is just before COVID, meeting tons of people. And I'm at this event and it was a pitch event. And this one story really got me. And I heard this guy's pitched his company. It was an AI company. And I went up to him at the break and just started asking him all these questions, as I often did with my own team members. I've always been naturally curious. And after like 20 minutes, he goes, can we hire you to do that? And I said, do what? And he goes, be our coach. And I was like, oh, I was just asking you questions. And honestly, that became my first client. Then I wrote the book. And then, it just has kind of run from there.
Oh my gosh, I love that. So you just told me a story that I've not heard you tell before. So that's super exciting.
Oh, which one?
Well, I didn't know the pitch competition story. So, but John, did you always want to go into asset management when you were little? Like, was that always what you wanted to do?
I don't know if I really wanted to as much as it was just sort of always around me. My dad always had some, financial stock. Louis Rukeyser, for anyone who ever saw that on Friday nights, that was always on Friday nights after school. And we always had like some business channel on. It was always reading stock reports and always buying stocks. And honestly, my parents are a great example of, what you might call the millionaire next door. They never made a lot of money. They really didn't. But they would always spend less than they made and invest in stocks and mutual funds. And they just did that for decades. And they are not not a financial burden to me in any sense of the imagination.
Wow. Okay.
So it's just kind of always around me. And I think that's what drew me in.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And then did you enjoy asset management?
I enjoyed a lot of aspects of it. I'm a really competitive person. So, it's a pretty competitive environment. I landed at a firm with a good culture. So it was competitive, but it wasn't cutthroat. occasionally those people would appear. About every 3 to 5 years, one of those people would show up and they'd be gone before long, which was nice. But it was competitive, not cutthroat. And uh, one thing interesting about working in asset management is, particularly as a salesperson like you were, uh, you get to cover you get to be aware and learn about so many parts of the world. So I've been reading The Economist for literally like 2 decades. And, you sort of, you have to really be good at your job. I think you have to be a good resource to your clients and a good coach and consultant to them. So I really enjoyed the learning and the knowledge growth along the way, and being able to understand and explain these things about what's going on in the world and why and how that's impacting your money. And so a lot of those aspects I enjoyed. And then as a leader, really helping people grow and get better and challenging them to elevate without making them feel threatened. And I say that word very intentionally because I often ask my team for feedback and advice. Like, what's it like working with me? How could we improve things around here? And, I wouldn't often throw a number of those questions at them at once, but each time we had a one-on-one coaching segment, I'd try to have one question around that kind of either our working relationship or how we can improve results as a team. And that was the feedback I got constantly. You find a way to challenge me, to raise my game, but I don't feel threatened. Like, oh, if I don't do this, I'm going to be fired or miss my bonus. It was more about how do we raise the bar? And I really appreciated that feedback.
That's really cool feedback to get as well. And as long as I've known you, that you definitely do that with me as well. And we're not in like a manager subordinate type of relationship, but you definitely challenge me to grow and get better, and are good at offering feedback without making me feel threatened as well. So that's that I can see. It's such a wonderful thing when someone will tell you, like, is able to give you that bird's eye view of what you do. Like sometimes when we don't even realize that we do it because it's just who we are. That's definitely who you are.
Thank you.
John, how did you find New Degree Press?
I mentioned earlier, I was writing these papers, and I kind of embraced a bit of the model that they had, just sort of on my own. As I've always done, I've always sought feedback and try to build things collaboratively. I did that in so many instances across my Wall Street career. I realized very early on, if you build something in a vacuum, it's going to die in a vacuum, right? Because nobody's going to care. You have to have that buy-in early on. And so I wrote this paper and I shared it across 4 different friends and mentors and things like this. And each person kind of helped me improve it a bit. And I actually spent months on it. And the final person I met with was a professor at my business school. And we had lunch right before Christmas 2019. And I was actually going to him to see if he could help me get it published in Forbes or some magazine or something. So we had lunch. And I said, what do you think I should do with these papers? What's next for these papers, you think? And he said, I think you've got the makings of a book here. And I said, well, I've thought about that, but honestly, I don't even know where to begin. And he said, I know an author coach. You should talk to this guy, Eric Custer. And literally, I got on the phone with Eric maybe a week later. And as super high energy guy, very innovative, thoughtful, and just a contagious approach to his, a passionate and contagious approach to his work. And literally the program started like a week or 2 later.
Wow. I am so jealous of the people that very early on in their entrepreneurial careers have been able to get their book out into the world. And I say that because I always figured writing a book would be a huge, huge leveraging tool for marketing and speaking engagements and workshops, but I also completely underestimated its power. And it should have been the first thing out the gate that I did. And so I love that you so quickly in your entrepreneurial journey had the book out, your book, The Optimizer, out in the world.
It kind of goes back to that woman's advice, go immerse yourself in something. So certainly this networking and meeting a ton of people, but also the writing. I really immersed I spent weeks and weeks on those papers. It turned from a 2-page paper into a multi-page series. And I was going to put it out over several weeks on LinkedIn. And so it was just really following the advice of 2 great people I met along the way. 1, go write something, and 2, go immerse yourself in something. It worked.
Well, can you tell us more about the book?
Yeah. when I spent all those years on Wall Street, one of the things I always, always, always did and continue to do to this day is I ask myself with any challenge, anything I'm taking on, like, could I do it more efficiently and could I do it more effectively? And that actually comes from an economics class I took in undergraduate. That was every question, every test we took. Those are the two questions we had to answer. Was this thought efficient? Was it effective? And that just has stayed with me for years and years. And so as I went across my career, I constantly would do that. And that drove me to figuring out, oh, wait, this isn't very efficient. So I need to tweak this or maybe outsource that or digitize it or whatever. Always, how do I do this better, more efficiently? And then how do I also do it and drive greater impact? You can't pick one or the other. Some you want to skew more to one or the other, like, right, if you can email stuff, if you can make a digital touch, right, that's super efficient. But at some point you have to have a meaningful contact with somebody and make it much more effective. But it's finding that balance between those two things and constantly asking that question. And that drove me to driving constant incremental change. And what I learned as my career evolved, and particularly as a leader, I found, Alisha, I had all these people they were my peers for many, many years. I worked at this firm 23 plus years. So all these people that were my peers suddenly were my direct reports. And I would talk to them casually over the years at conferences or whatever on the phone. And many of them, I would think, man, you're so smart. This person is so intelligent. And then I would see the way they operated in their jobs. And I would realize your skill set and what you're offering to the company are not lining up. Your skill set is here and what you're offering is here, if you will. So your skill set is above what you're offering to the company. And as I became a leader and talked to more and more people about this, I realized that what was driving that was this emotional charge. Right?
Yeah.
Because if you drive change, if you lead change, and I can tell you, not everyone appreciated my passion for change and innovation. And I worked on Wall Street. I can promise you that. And that's why collaboration was so important to help overcome those things. But as you drive change, it makes people afraid. Yeah. Right? What if I do this and it doesn't work? And then I don't get my bonus or don't get promoted, or I have to shame. I have to go tell my boss it didn't work. I failed, or my spouse or my partner, whatever. And what I found is taking this incremental change mindset, if I could help my team members think like that and act like that each and every week, two things happen. One, it takes away the emotional burden because it's marginal change week to week, trying to allocate 10% of time to driving something new that's meaningful to our business and meaningful to you, that person. And I would try to help them unearth that through coaching. So one, it helps overcome the emotional burden. And two, over time, a 10% change every week adds up massively. Right. So you get the same result over time, but it takes away that emotional burden and it helps people release their gifts to everybody, which once I started to see that happen, that was a mind bender. Like we bought an ETF firm, I forget what year it was, but probably 5 or 6 years ago, but it was a brand new firm and everyone kind of had some existing assets that we've acquired them, a couple $100 million or something each, the managers. Within a year, my team had the only $1 billion franchise in the company. Wow. And people were like, what are you doing? What's going on over there? And I was telling them about this incremental change thing. They're like, that doesn't work. I'm like, okay.
Well, then why'd they ask, right? Like if they're going to tell you it doesn't work.
That's a terrible idea. All right.
Oh, golly. Yeah.
So that's really what it was about. It was trying to help. As a leader, you have to drive change, but you also have to understand and respect the fact that people have a lot of emotional baggage goes along with change. And I found this incremental change mindset really can help overcome that and get you the results. It might feel a little slow in the short term, but in the long term, it's always paid off.
Yeah. So you really have you have an entrepreneurial mindset that you brought to the work that you did on Wall Street, it sounds like. I'm curious if you always kind of if you ever dreamed of being an entrepreneur, or did it just kind of fall into your lap?
No, I've always thought about being a business leader. I've had a few bouts in my life, like wherever I've worked, whatever I've done, I've always kind of moved into this kind of leadership role because I've always had this ability to kind of look at things, sort of zoom out and look at the broader landscape of things. And honestly, I don't know where that comes from, but that's kind of always been a thing for me. whenever I played sports, I was always the captain of the team. I just kind of, just the way I would approach it, always that seemed to happen. And same thing in my career. Um, and so in this business, as I know you were in, as an external salesperson or wholesaler, as we call them, it's very entrepreneurial. I mean, I lived, I don't know, 1,000 miles away from the home office. I saw my boss a couple of times a year. And so you were totally on your own. So in many ways, it was kind of this quasi entrepreneur thing, which honestly I loved. Go out and do what you do. And, you obviously tons of support from the home office and marketing, all these things. But at the end of the day, you are the one who had to go out and execute every day and build that plan and make it work. And I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, I love that. I'm curious, in your book, The Optimizer, what's one of your favorite stories that you tell in the book?
This was a big early lesson for me as a leader. So as I mentioned earlier, right, I was leading these people, I was peers to so many of these people, and suddenly I'm their boss, right? So it was a little bit of this awkward shift. Some people just kind of were like, oh, you're still my peer, right? But suddenly I was their boss. So it was a bit of an awkward thing. And so I come into the role, and my manager, my previous manager had this conference call schedule. We just always had conference calls. We were remote long before it was fashionable. And I just wasn't feeling the impact from those calls. And so I reached out to one of the guys, and I was asking for feedback about a lot of stuff, and I was getting nothing early on. The feedback was kind of like, oh, it's great here, everything's fine, this kind of thing, just mundane answers. And I reached out to this one guy, I'd been around a long time, and I'd taken the time to really build a deeper relationship with him. And I said, Brian, how do we make these calls better?
Mm.
And he, I said, I don't feel like we're getting the engagement I'd like to see out of these. And then value, right? And I said, how do we fix these conference calls? And he goes, get rid of a bunch of them. And I remember thinking, like, who doesn't want to listen to me talk for an hour at them? And that was it kind of stung when I heard it, but right, this is how we grow. When you ask, like, if you want to find out what's going on, ask people and what they think of you. And so literally from that moment, I took the schedule, I just deleted the ones around holidays. So like Memorial Day, I'd push it to Tuesday kind of thing. I just deleted that one. And I did that across the whole year. So I took his advice, I made a change, and I gave him full public credit for it. I sent a note to the team. Hey, everyone, Brian had this great idea to try to help our conference calls get better. We're going to delete a bunch of them. And that simple, I mean, how long did it take me to do that, right? What it took was a lot of vulnerability to go to a team member and say, hey, I don't think I figured this out here. What would you do if you were me? That's kind of my favorite way to frame these things. And that was it. And as soon as I did that, because I was already asking for feedback and advice, but again, getting these mundane answers, and that from that moment forward, like the fire hose turned on, because people said, oh, he's actually asking because he cares and he's paying attention. And if I come up with a good idea, he'll run with it. And guess what? Also give me full credit for it.
Yeah.
Which, these things sound so simple, but it's not. This is not standard operating procedure in my observation.
Yeah, they sound simple, and they're simple to say, and they're simple to like brainstorm doing those things, but it is not simple in practice, right? I mean, that's pretty advanced ninja stuff right there.
I've literally worked with people in a coaching capacity now in my new life, and I've suggested this idea to them. To say that their reaction was, I mean, they couldn't even fathom asking a team member how they might improve something like that. That idea on their radar screen, they just literally couldn't even imagine it, or doing it. That was mind blowing.
Well, you bring up something that I think is really important within this story, and that you said it kind of stung at first. And I want us to put a pin in that for a second, because I feel like asking for feedback, asking for help is very challenging. And when you ask for advice, when you are soliciting the advice, the request for advice, you're going to get critical answers back. And that's uncomfortable. And I'm wondering if you have any techniques, or if you have any ways that you have developed to help yourself receive in to receive that type of critical feedback back, and to sit with it before, like if something stings, how do you respond instead of react?
I love that. Great way to frame that question. A big part of it is, well, first of all, I will tell you, great leaders do this all the time, and it gets easier over time. But to get more tactical to your question specifically, is mentally prepare yourself for hearing things you're not going to want to hear. I mean, literally, but when I go into difficult meetings, presentations, challenging circumstances, I literally tell myself that in my head, hey, I might not hear everything I want to hear here today, but this is about growing and getting better and better delivering for our, whatever your particular goal of the moment is. And the real key I have found over time, Alisha, is trying to, it's not easy to do, but with practice and I think the right mindset, separate your ego, your personality from whatever it is you're trying to solve for. So many times we say, oh, I've got this new great idea or this new thing, whatever it is in leadership. And if people challenge it, they're not challenging the idea, they're challenging me, and they're telling me I'm not smart or I'm not good enough. And that's people connecting their ego to their work. And if you can detether those two things and connect your ego to driving results for your business, your customers, your clients, what have you, then the focus changes. And it's not about you, it's about delivering better results and outcomes for everybody. And that to me is really how I try to think through it.
John, I love that so much. Thank you so much for sharing it. And I think there's a really big difference between solicited advice and unsolicited advice, right? And like you said, good leaders do ask these questions. And I'm wondering, even so, a lot of the folks who are listening to this podcast, they might be emerging leaders, right? So they might be working within a company right now in a certain capacity, or they are solopreneurs starting their own businesses, or maybe even have a small team. And I'm wondering what advice you can give them right now for starting these types of practices so that they'll more quickly get easier.
I think just starting these conversations is so important. And the first couple might be awkward, but start to dip your toe into asking these types of questions. Hey, how do you think that conference call went? How do you think that meeting went? What do you think about this initiative we put together? And start them with people in the organization that you know well, that you've got good relationships with, because it's like a muscle. You start to work at it, you get better at it. And then when you take it to people where the conversation is going to be more difficult or challenging, you're more ready for that emotional reaction you may or may not have. And also go in with that mindset. Hey, I may hear things today I don't want to hear, but this is about driving this result, this goal, this initiative, whatever it is we're trying to get done. And, I think start small is the big takeaway for this idea for me. And also think about where your trust is with that person, right? One of my favorite exercises, and I actually write about this in the book, I got it from an author, Thomas Chimera Permuzak. He said, go into Google and type in "my manager is," and let it auto-populate. And guess what comes up, Alisha?
I don't know.
Nothing positive. My manager is a micromanager. My manager is out to get me. My manager hates me. Like, right? You get those 7 or 8 things from Google back, right? It's exactly what comes up. So before you even start this exercise, you might just type that in to Google and to have a little bit of a mindset of, some of the, I'll say, extreme views that might be sitting out there. So when you go approach these folks, you have a better sense of where they might be coming from, or at least take the time to reflect on where they may be coming from. And if you haven't developed that trusting relationship, that connection, at least be aware that this may be where they're coming from, because it might create some negative or defensiveness on their end. And there's so many great ways to build trust that are overlooked as well. Happy to talk about that. But did I answer your question there?
You absolutely did. But what you just said ways to build trust. Let's go there. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, to me, the amount of intentionality is just so critical. And, it's about connecting with them on a personal level. It's about giving credit. I mentioned that earlier. It's about this feedback idea, and it's about being transparent as transparent as you possibly can, right? If people are constantly, I had managers over the years that was kind of their game. If I don't tell you everything, I have all the cards and all the power, and therefore I have, I can control you. Who wins there, right?
Right.
One person, maybe, sort of, in the short term, but certainly not in the long term. So it's taking this blend of these concepts: feedback, the credit, the transparency, and the personal issue. And I'll tell you one of my a story on that really was another game changer for me. I had a guy on my team. I went out and traveled with him, as I did with all my people, and I noticed he wasn't listening. He was really a poor listener. He was kind of a top third performer, but far from sort of top third to top half, but far from like a top performer. And I realized at these meetings, he would come in and ask questions, which I always coach people to do, like, let's find out what your customers' needs are, because his boss was there. He'd ask a few questions and then dive right into, oh, well, I don't care what this person said. I'm going to sell them whatever I can sell them today. Whatever they said just kind of went right over his head. And after the meeting, I was like, this person told you a very specific thing that they were looking for, and you didn't even acknowledge it. I said, what happened there? And he didn't even realize he did it. He was so used to just coming in and, sort of steamrolling them, hey, how's it going? Oh, here's this product today, whatever. Anyway, he took that feedback, and no one had ever given him that feedback. And he'd been with the firm for years. He ran with it. So he has a great year. Fast forward, we're at the kickoff meeting where we have this award ceremony. And sadly, he was a close number 2. He wasn't going to win the big, I could give out one award every year. He was like a close number 2, but he just didn't displace the top person. And I knew he was going to be really bummed because he'd worked so hard to have a big year and this kind of thing. So it was his 40th birthday as well. And so I called up the event planning team and I said, hey, it's this guy's birthday. And as a manager, we always got suites at some big fancy hotel, right? And so I said, can I trade rooms with this guy and then maybe get him a birthday cake? And because I knew him and knew what he liked to do on the weekends, and I knew he liked IPAs, I got a bucket of like local craft IPAs and a birthday cake. I also knew, because I constantly asked him, like, how do you interact with your clients? How do you make them happy? This kind of thing. He loved to write cheesy little notes to people. That was just kind of his shtick. So birthday cake, beers, changed rooms. What did all this cost me? Like $50, $100, right? It wasn't like I spent thousands of dollars on this. And he shows up, and the note I wrote in there said, happy birthday. Thought you could use some more space to work on your big ideas. He was always coming up with big ideas. It's a 40-year-old man. He gets to his room, sends me a text. He's like, you have to come visit my room. And I walk over there. He's almost in tears, a 40-year-old man over this. And again, what did it cost me? It cost me knowing him, right? Building a relationship with him. And fast forward 12 months beyond that, he didn't get the award that year. Fast forward 12 months, he did. I think he won it 2 of the next 3 years. Wow. And none of that would have happened if I didn't know him, if I didn't solicit his feedback, develop that relationship, be honest with him where I could. And when he had great ideas, give him credit for it.
Yeah. You not only developed the relationship, you showed him that you saw him. You saw him and he felt appreciated and recognized. And gosh, that goes so far in the things that we do. And I think it's a great reminder for us to just like spend some time reflecting on who it is, even in our lives, in our businesses, in our work, who needs to be seen and recognized and heard. And those those things that really don't actually they don't actually take that much time. They don't actually take that much money, but they go a long way.
I mean, when I had every 2 weeks I had calls with my team members, very similar to a lot of coaching, current coaching engagements I have, but I started it on Wall Street. And part of that conversation was always about, what'd you do this weekend? Where'd you guys go on vacation? Or this kind of thing. Occasionally I would send them a gift to their hotel room when they're on vacation. But there are a few things better than showing up at a hotel and, I'm not there, right? You're in the Caribbean or whatever. I would just call the hotel and I know what they liked, and, like champagne and strawberries or something. And even better if I knew what their spouse liked. That was even a bigger win. But I did that. I've done that for so many people over the years. And it is like, again, it's not a super expensive thing to do. And you would have thought you left a duffel bag of $100 bills in the room, the way they react to it,
Oh, John, that's just amazing. So another talent that you have is that you are also a podcast host. Can you share a little bit about that as well?
Sure. It's been really fun, working. So one of my biggest clients is the book publisher. And so working with them over the last year and a half or so, recognizing, hey, it'd be nice to have a voice out there in the world and give the authors a voice to have and to be heard. And, also give them some training on how to go get these episodes, these appearances, and how to execute them. And, they were super excited about that. So I launched it. We just closed up season 4, which I'm so excited you will be a guest on here in a few weeks.
I'm so excited too.
And it is just right. It's just been so much fun getting a chance to interview people, learn about them. And it's really given me a great appreciation for podcasts, because particularly with authors, because what I've learned is in 30, 40 minutes, they just spent a year and a half, maybe even longer, but formally about a year researching, writing, interviewing, doing all this work. So they are just massive experts in whatever they're in, and it's super fresh in their minds. And in that 30, 40 minutes, you get a very sort of Cliff Note version of it, for those that remember Cliff Notes out there from when I was in undergrad.
Oh, I remember Cliff Notes.
And so you can learn so much in such a short period of time about someone who's arguably one of the top minds in whatever their category is in the last 12 months and has done more work on it. So it's been super fun to get to learn about it, to create this voice for the publishing house. And it's been a great marketing tool, I think, for the authors to go out and promote their story.
Absolutely. And one of the things that you've helped folks do is you have developed a pitch template. You train these authors on how to pitch to podcasters. And I'm wondering if you want to share any of that, because as a podcaster myself, I wish everyone would have to come work with you first before they send a pitch.
Well, first of all, you helped me build it. So thank you for that. That was awesome. And really, to me, when I was going out to promote my book, so basically all the coaching that I do around the podcast is largely based on the failures that I had. It's like, oops, that didn't work. Right? And so I got to do this another way. And when I first wrote the book, you're immersed in it. It's just you're so in it. It's hard to think about anything else. And I was sending out these notes to podcast people, hosts. Hey, I wrote a book. I'm amazing. Have me on your show. And I was getting zero response. Right. And then I went back. I put at some moment I hit this sort of, oh wait, this is sales, right? I'm selling them on giving me their time and their airspace, right? And so once I flipped that switch and made it about them and finding the intersection of their needs, their audience's need, and my needs, that win-win-win, that sort of Venn diagram, if you will. Once I started to focus on that and prioritizing their audience and then them and then me, then the flip switched and I started to get responses and started to get on more and more shows. And really, it was about creating that win-win-win and approaching it from a mindset of abundance, if you will, rather than, oh, I have to get on the show and otherwise nothing good is going to happen or what have you. But how do I create that abundance mindset, create that win-win-win for everybody? And then it started to happen. And, through that outreach, framing it that way, making it shorter, making the outreach shorter and more impactful to them. And that really was a big turning point for me.
I love it. I love what you do. You also have, do you want to share that? You might not want to share this secret, but you have a secret close when you finish up podcasts, and I won't make you share it if you don't want to, but I would, if you want to share it, I think it's just absolutely brilliant.
It would be hard for me not to share after talking about my abundance mindset, wouldn't it? Because ideas are just ideas, right? And what I've found over the years is you can have all the ideas in the world, but someone still has to go out and execute on them and to make it happen, right? I remember I had a Wall Street client. I had a business partner traveled. We were meeting with a big client of mine, and she was saying, hey, how do you do this? How do you do that? And after the meeting, he pulled me aside and he said, hey, I don't want to tell this person all this stuff because she's going to go tell, my competitors. And I told him basically what I just told you. I was like, you know what you do, Tom, differently? You do the work, right? Like your model isn't that complex, no offense, but you do the work. So the idea I like to use is right after the recording is over, the host often turns off the recording, saves a few minutes to chat. Be thankful, be curious, be helpful, be gone, right? Thank you for having me on. Who doesn't why would you not be grateful for that opportunity? Be curious, which stories of mine resonated with you and which didn't. I always ask that question. It's great to recognize, like, hey, I'm curious what the host thinks of how I did here and which stories. And so that's sort of asking for their feedback, which is a nice thing to do. Two, it gives you some data capture, right? That story didn't resonate. I'm going to stop telling that one, or this one did. I'm going to keep telling that one, right? And then the last one is back to this driving this win-win idea further. How can I help you? And Alisha, the most common response I get is, no one's ever asked me that before. And so they're dumbfounded.
I can relate to that.
I had one host, I asked her that question after she turned off the recording. She stared off into space for so long, I thought the Wi-Fi went out. I was like, Angie, are you there?
Because we typically don't get asked that question. I think podcasting seems like, oh, they must be getting paid. They must be making so much money, especially if you're producing like a really good quality show, right? And oftentimes the podcaster is pouring themselves into this show. They're pouring their own resources, their own everything into this show. And it's a big service to the people that are on the show. And somehow that gets lost in translation. And as a podcaster, I hope that I am serving the guests that are on the show. I mean, it's really important, and it is service to some level. And it's very rare that someone asks how they can help you with that. And so I think that's absolutely brilliant. It's just such a brilliant close. And I love that. And John, one of the things I love so much about you is you practice what you preach. You do the things that you talk about, and you're so genuine. Like, you give and you serve so much in your work with authors at New Degree Press. I'm not, I've never been coached by you from a leadership coaching perspective, but I imagine that I know who you are with all of us. So I can only imagine that as an executive coach, that's who you are with your clients as well. And it's so appreciated. Like, it's a breath of fresh air to have someone who practices what they preach. But I also feel really lucky that you're in we're in each other's sphere. So.
Wow, it's very kind of you to say. The feeling is very mutual. I feel like I try to take the same approach to everybody I work with, because it works. How do you approach things with a win-win mindset and help people? If the people aren't seeing that, help them see it. And if they don't see it, challenge them to see it and find a better way. And I think it's just so important, right? If we can work in this constant improvement mindset and help others, good things tend to come back to us.
Yeah. I've got one more question for you around the podcast. And I'm wondering if being a podcast host, has that changed has that affected, changed, enhanced the way you coach?
The thing that really stands out to me about that question is when I am coaching my clients, particularly outside of New Degree Press, is how long they take to get to answering a question.
Well, we're okay with it taking a long time here. So,
but and what oftentimes comes out of that is, if they can't answer a question for me that I think is kind of simple in sort of 2 to 3 minutes, how are they interacting with their teams? Right? If I come to you and you're my boss and I ask you a question and 15 minutes later, I'm like, what the heck is this person talking about? Because I can't bring my thoughts together very clearly and succinctly. That it's already hard enough to communicate with your team members, but if they're really lost in all this sort of stuff you're talking about. So it's interesting how this communication, sort of succinct communication concept that I coach so much on the podcast, how much it's becoming part of executive coaching as well, because I find a lot of people struggle with that.
Wow. Okay. You just kind of blew my mind wide open on that. Okay. I love that answer, because basically what you're saying, if it goes back to what we talked about on how you build trust, right? Like, transparency helps build trust when you're able to do that. Well, you can't be transparent if you're not clear and concise.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And you're also, you're not going to connect with them, because if you're answering questions in 15-minute answers, the engagement isn't there. The other person's going to tune out, and they're sure as heck not going to get the one or two or three, if you're lucky, key points you're trying to get across.
Yeah. I remember in sales, they used to always say, whoever talks the most in a conversation is the person that feels like the conversation went the best. And so that's also a little bit interesting of when we're thinking about, okay, can we not only relay an idea clearly and concisely, can you do it kind of quickly so that both parties can engage?
Yeah. I over the years worked with some people that would come into leadership meetings and just talk and talk and talk and talk, and people would just zone out.
Mm-hmm.
And, that last 15 minutes might as well not even happen.
Yeah.
Right. And, so part of it is also what it helps people do, because to get to this concise, succinct communication concept as a leader, you really have to know what it is you're trying to drive home. And so many times that we're so busy, we're often shooting from the hip and don't have this, what are the 2 or 3 things we really are focused on right now that we need to get done, and framing everything under that. And so if you don't have that framework set up, it's easy to turn into these, sort of drifting, these drifting conversations, and then nobody wins.
Yeah.
And so for me, when I coach people on communication, it's what are those 2 or 3 key points you want to make? And they need to appear everywhere in your communication. And what that does is, 1, helps people understand the importance of it, but 2, helps them understand as things evolve and things change. How do I prioritize this new thing, whatever this new thing is that came along, or this new training, or this new tool, whatever it is? What bucket do I fit it under? And you need to help them connect the dots on that. So one of the big things as a sales leader for me was, what is your sales process? Right? What is your sales brand, and how do you build that? And how do you constantly get more efficient and effective in how you operate? Everything I said to my team fell under one of those 3 buckets. Everything. And every time we had a meeting, if I brought in something new, I would tell them distinctly, this ties under that bucket. So it helped them mentally say, oh, this isn't a new thing I have to sort of fit into my life somewhere. This is a process thing. This is a brand thing, what have you. And so I do a lot of that work with people today and how they communicate with their teams. And a lot of people haven't done that work. What are those big 3 things? And they start to see, team members not acting in a way they want. Well, how have they been coached or trained?
John, that is so powerful. Thank you for sharing that. Is there anything else you would like to share with listeners today?
We did launch this new book coaching program, Book Creators, Thought Leaders. The next cohort is going to start in June. So if you have an idea and want to start a movement around your book, your thought, your thesis, come visit us at the creator.institute and hear and learn more about the story. We'd love to talk to you about it.
Yeah, and I'm joining your June cohort, so
I can't wait.
Book number 2 is coming. So last question for you is, how do you live a life of abundance?
It's about thinking, it's about finding that win-win, right? So many times we think about life as a zero-sum game. And if we can think about bigger goals, bigger initiatives that we're focused on, and then figuring out how to help everybody win, this is how you make 1 + 1 = 3, right? When more people can win, because it creates opportunities. I fully believe karma is a boomerang. If you help people and put positive things out to the world, that will come back to you in a good way. Same thing with negative things, right? And so I try to put positive things out to the world and help others. And I think if you can have that mindset that good things come from good things, it sounds so simple to say out loud, but again, I find a lot of people don't think about it that way. They think, how do I maximize whatever I'm doing? I'm super busy. But take a step back, think about where that win-win or win-win-win might be, and build a plan around that versus, whatever it is you're trying to solve in the short term.
John, I love all of it. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us today. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much for having me, Alisha. I really enjoyed the conversation. Great to see you.